What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we're taking a look at recent news alongside the latest ADP movement to see which players are gaining and losing the most value right now. Sit back, hit the like button, and let's start things off with Juwan Johnson. Juwan has been a very popular sleeper pick this season, but all of that's going to change. We got our first big injury news of the offseason. He's going to need foot surgery. They have not given a timeline, but they said he's expected to miss a lot of time. They are hopeful he can be ready to start the season. That shouldn't give us too much confidence. In my opinion, it basically makes him undraftable. I already had a lot of late round tight end flyers I liked, and I'll put a link on the screen to that video where I go over, my favorite ones later in drafts. He wasn't part of that. I thought he was fine to draft, but at this point, if he's going to miss all of camp, if there's a chance he's not even going to start the season healthy, and he already wasn't one of the ones I'd really want to be targeting later on, thought there were higher upside options, just makes it not worth it. Also worth noting, staying with the Saints, we got news that A.T. Perry hasn't been performing that well, hasn't really taken that second-year jump they were hoping for. I don't know, doesn't really impact all that much on its own. But when you kind of combine these two things together, I think it's just, instills our confidence in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, while also basically signaling, another season where Taysom Hill is probably going to have a really strong role. They've been talking about Taysom Hill, how it was this new coaching staff. They really want to get him the football. They're lining him up as a running back a ton. So it seems like his touches were already naturally going up. So if A.T. Perry's not performing, if Juwan Johnson might miss time in season, but will definitely miss basically all of camp, Taysom Hill is probably going to be a pretty good pick if you can draft him as a tight end. So for those of you who play on Underdog, he's a quarterback. Not worth drafting there. I know on DK, he's a tight end. I don't know what the sites are going to do this season as far as Yahoo, Sleeper, ESPN. I don't know what they're going to do for tight end. If you are in a league where Taysom Hill is allowed to be a tight end, he would project in that tight end 10 to 12 range, and he would be a pretty decent pick given the upside. But again, I would say overall for this news, it is Olave and Shaheed are going to be very strong picks at their ADP. Moving over to Atlanta, we've got Drake London saying that the big difference between this season and last season is that the ball is going to be in the air. That is music to our ears in fantasy. And as if we needed to hear more, we got Raheem Morris, who replaced Arthur Smith as their head coach, saying they just need to get the ball to Bijan as much as possible. I don't think these comments are going to really impact ADP at all, because Falcons players are already going so early, right? Bijan, I believe, is the second running back in most formats, but 2, 3, him and Hall going next to each other, but he's a mid-first round pick everywhere. You've got Drake London being an early to mid-second round pick everywhere. So I don't really know that either of them have room to go up all that much. It's more just, gives us a little bit of confidence in this Falcons offense. Sometimes we can get a little bit over-eager, right? We assume that teams are going to change a lot more than they end up changing. We assume that they're going to go really pass-heavy. They end up 1% more pass-heavy. It really does seem like the Falcons are going to throw the ball a lot more this season, and they really do plan on featuring Bijan Robinson. So wheels up for London, wheels up for Bijan, at least in terms of confidence in those picks. But again, I don't think it's going to impact ADPs more than half a pick or one pick, right? Which is not something we need to talk about that much. Someone who I do anticipate seeing their ADP move is Jaleel McLaughlin. You guys know I've been out on McLaughlin all summer. He's been some people's trendy breakout pick. He was technically a breakout last season. I did have him on some sleeper lists. I drafted him in our Dynasty League. So I thought late in drafts last season, he was worth a shot. Definitely going earlier. I took him in one of the final rounds of our Dynasty League, which obviously has, 10, 12 bench spots on it. Took him in one of the last picks there. This season, he's going much earlier, and he's been rising all summer. And recent comments from Sean Payton, from the team itself, I think that's going to keep pushing his ADP higher. Again, I've been out on him just because we know Denver is going to have a 3 running back committee. So they are not going to feature 1 running back. We know that while Sean Payton offenses have been just a gold mine for running back production in the past, a lot of that was due to Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees, right? Like, it's a lot easier to have a ton of running back production if Drew Brees is going to dump off the running backs a ton. Or when you have Alvin Kamara, yeah, the running back's going to be good because it's Alvin Kamara, right? It doesn't guarantee us that with lesser quality running backs, along with Bo Nix at quarterback, that we're still going to see super high-end running back production. Also, remember what time of year we're in. So when you hear reports about especially running backs, like tearing it up in camp, if they are a smaller running back, like there's no pads yet, like no one's getting hit. So it really does benefit these smaller, shiftier backs. They're going to look a lot better when there's no pads on, no one's allowed to tackle them. Yeah, they're going to look really, really good. Once the pads come on, once people have to be in pass protection, once people, are getting hit, getting tackled, if we're still seeing this hype around McLaughlin, then maybe I'll be more in on it. But at that point, his ADP will probably skyrocket even more. So my guess is I'm going to continue being out on him all summer. But nonetheless, I still think these reports are valid and that really it's like we need to continue being out on Javonte Williams. Like Javonte Williams is like the one running back that Sean Payton in this backfield did not invest in. He's brought in a lot of other backs. Like I don't see a world where I'm taking Javonte Williams at his ADP right now. Still not on McLaughlin, but at least he's getting more hype. Two rookies that have been getting a lot of hype also are Marshawn Lloyd and Lloyd McConkey. Lloyd, of course, is expected to be the running back 2 in Green Bay. To be determined what they do with A.J. Dillon. I still am holding out, for that possibility that maybe he just ends up getting cut or traded, and that, honestly, he would go to backfield and we'd probably be furious with it because the backfield, we'd be like, like what if he went to Dallas, right? And we're sitting here being like, oh, Rico Dowdle is like this trendy pick. What if he ends up going to the Chargers, and it's like people really wanted Himani Vidal, but now you're going with A.J. Dillon there. Like, I think there's a few situations right now that, people are going to get cut and they're going to go to these other teams and we're going to be like, oh, didn't see that coming, right? But anyways, I think Lloyd is still the number 2. So no matter what they do with A.J. Dillon, I still think Marshawn Lloyd is going to be their second back just because of the skill set. Like, and again, he is also someone where we need to just like, in the back of our mind, he's an explosive player, a very shifty player. He's one of the players that really produces better now. We'll see once the pad gets on, right? But I think his skill set matches up more with Jacobs in terms of like, if they want to go more pass heavy, if they want to go into that like 2-minute drill, and maybe they don't want Jacobs in that role, well, they don't want Dillon in that role. So it's like Dillon is really like a direct backup to Jacobs in terms of like he only gets touches if Jacobs gets hurt. I think Marshawn Lloyd is actually going to have a weekly role. It's not going to be massive, but I think there's like a reason his ADP should be climbing, and I do like him still ahead of ADP, and I like buy into the hype right now because I think they can use him properly on a great offense. For Lloyd McConkey, he's kind of expected to be like their Keenan Allen. Like, it's kind of putting a lot on him to, be the next Keenan Allen because Keenan Allen is such a fantastic wide receiver. But in that role, right? Hopefully being the person that Justin Herbert can lean on, be the person who's converting third downs, always open over the middle of the field, just that incredible slot receiver. That's what they want him to be. The one thing that I want to keep in mind is that for Ladd specifically is we still haven't learned, like, so basically he's getting a lot of hype right now, but we still don't know. Our big questions on him is, can he stay healthy? Because that was a problem in college. Well, we don't know yet, right? I mean, it had pads on. But then also, can he play on the outside? So the reports are he's crushing in the slot, but there's still no reports of him playing on the outside. Like, once we get reports where he's lining up at X, right? That would be fantastic, running some routes as X receiver. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, though. And so if this is going to be a more run-heavy team, well, they're not running it a ton with 3 wide receiver sets. So there's still going to be a lot of plays where if he's their slot receiver, they're going to run fewer 3 wide receiver sets than normal, which is going to limit his snaps. So that's a concern. Again, the health is a concern, but then also the ADP. Like, I think Marshawn Lloyd could go up. Lloyd McConkey, like, how much can he really go up? Like, he's already going ahead of Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas Jr., Hopkins, JSN, Deontay Johnson, Christian Watson. And maybe you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But for him to rise, he's got to go ahead of Addison, Adunze, Godwin, Ridley, Worthy, Jaden Reed. That's asking a lot. Like, I do think he can push his way into that tier, but like we're asking for a very, very good season from him for him to push into and past that tier. So I think we may have seen kind of like the peak for McConkey's ADP, at least in terms of like maybe he could go up another like 2 or 3 spots. But I think this general range that he's in right now is probably where he'll end up. But, you know, you never know with hype, right? Like if he just goes out there and everyone actually thinks he's already the next Keenan Allen, sure, he can go up another round or 2 in ADP. One situation that I feel like I've been a little bit too low on, and recently we've been hearing really good reports on, and so I think I need to change my stance. Not even change my stance, but just get on board a little bit more, is this Seattle passing attack. Now, I've liked Ken Walker as, you know, really solid value in drafts, running back 16. It feels like a very fair price to pay for a player as talented as he is on a good offense. So I've been, you know, getting a lot of shares of him. I take Tyler Lockett a lot as the wide receiver 51. That feels too cheap. Like, we haven't seen the cliff for him, even if JSN, which I have projected, is now going to be their second most targeted receiver, second best in fantasy. Like, that can still happen, and Lockett can still pay off wide receiver 51 and have some spiked weeks. So I still like Lockett as well. We talked yesterday about how I really like Noah Fant as kind of like a pick in your last like round or two on really like round like 16, 17 on Underdog, potentially bump up a little bit in redraft leagues. But I've been shying away from Metcalf as wide receiver 22, JSN even as wide receiver 44. And as much as I like Geno, like I talk about Geno a lot and how much I like him, I have him ahead of ADP. I feel like I don't end up with him because I feel like I just like already have my 2 quarterbacks by the time I get to Geno's spot, and I just don't wait long enough for him, even though, again, I think he's a really good value. So I think it needs to be more aggressive on this team. Pete Carroll not coaching there anymore. And while they are learning a new system under Ryan Grubb, new offensive coordinator, formerly the offensive coordinator of UW, it seems like they're going to throw the ball at a much higher rate. It seems like they're going to push the ball downfield a lot more. My whole thing with Seattle and why I've been off on specifically Metcalf and JSN is that there are like so many mouths to feed that, and when you like watch them play, you're like, okay, this can work, right? You got a bunch of talented players. This can work in fantasy if you just throw the ball. You've got so many elite weapons. Geno's perfectly fine quarterback. You can do it through the air, and then they like don't. They'll play like slower. They'll like run the ball at a pretty high rate, and you're like, like why aren't you using these incredible talents? If they're actually going to this season, maybe it's not going to be a problem that they have 3 amazing wide receivers. Maybe, you know, 2 of them can crush every week, and then that 2 can kind of like rotate through. So I think it needs to be more aggressive. We don't want, my one hesitation basically is that like we've seen in the past that new schemes get hyped up. It's like, you know, more pass heavy, more aggressive. And then it's like, you know, it takes them halfway through the season to actually get going with that new scheme because it's a new scheme for all of these players. So I'm probably right now only going to give a small bump to Seattle. Like maybe I'll bump Seattle, just give them like a teensy bit higher pass play rate, which will also lead to a few more plays overall. Maybe I add in half or a full touchdown overall in their projection. And that kind of just gives everyone a little bit more room in the projections to grow a little bit without like increasing or decreasing anyone's like personal target share or like their personal efficiency. But yeah, I think I need to do that. And then if we get into camp, so if we hit, you know, July into August, and it's like, okay, this offense is humming and like they actually look really good in the scheme, I'll bump it up even further from there, but I just don't want to be too aggressive right now. Okay, that's probably the biggest ADP news. Some quick hitters after that we don't need to dive too much into, but I kind of want you to know that's happened recently. Ricky Pearsall has looked fantastic. He is going to have a role on the 49ers as their number 3 wide receiver. No matter what happens with Ayuk or Debo, his 100 percentile ceiling obviously needs either an injury to one of those 2 or one of them to get traded away because they don't want to do the new contract. But I have been hammering Pearsall. I think he's a phenomenal pick later in drafts. But yeah, he's getting a ton more hype. McLaurin, he hyped up Jaden Daniels, specifically calling out his anticipation on throws. Great to hear, especially because McLaurin's a fantastic wide receiver. I still am holding out a little bit of hope in Dotson. But like the offense can be good. It's just that they've just never figured out the quarterback position. Maybe it is Daniels. Who knows? Michael Wilson seems to be primed for that year 2 jump, although I want to see it in camp with him. He wasn't someone that performed that well last season, so he will need to make that jump. And everyone in that offense is getting hyped up. Well, you listen to comments about everyone, specifically in the receiving game, they're hyping all of them up. So, you know, seeing that they can't all be amazing, right? You can't have Zay, and Wilson and McBride all have this huge jump forward while also bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr., who you're also hyping up. So I think a little too much hype maybe on Arizona. Maybe need to take a step back there. Nick Chubb, he's progressing, but we have no timetable. That's not a deal. We'll touch on him in a second when we go over the biggest risers and fallers by ADP. But that's why his ADP is dropping, is because we just still have no timetable there. People are panicking there. And then Jalen McMillan, he has looked fantastic. That's awesome to see. I've taken a stance on him. I took a stance before we got any news out of camp. I have graded him out as one of the best values in drafts later on. I think he will be the Bucs' third wide receiver. I think he is very talented, will command a target share. I've been taking a ton in the final round of Underdog drafts. Oh, and Waller officially retired, but I've been projecting that to happen all summer, so nothing changes projections there. So that's the biggest news. Let's look back at the last week, though, and that's the latest news as of Thursday at noon or 1 o'clock, I guess, when I'm recording. Any news after that, we'll talk about in future videos, or you can ask in the Discord. Again, free. Go to the website and get in the Discord. Next, we'll talk about what's actually happened. So that's the news. There's some players that are rising or falling by ADP when there's no real news surrounding it, or just little tidbits of news that have kind of, come off from past videos. At running back, 3 biggest risers are Elijah Mitchell, Ty Chandler, and Jerome Ford. 3 biggest fallers are Nick Chubb, Donta Foreman, and Tank Bigsby. Half of that list is basically just the market shifting a little bit more over to Jerome Ford and back from Foreman and Nick Chubb. Analysis there is obvious, right? People don't have a ton of confidence in Chubb because there's no timeline. And if people think it's going to be Ford over Foreman, it's very easy to see how those things are correlated. I will say this, though, because a lot of people have asked me my take on Nick Chubb because he's getting really cheap in drafts. I was in a draft the other day where I took 3 running backs with Underdog draft, okay? Took 3 running backs in the first, 5 or 6 rounds, so 3 early. And I was like, okay, I'm probably going to take 1 or 2 later on. I got to pick 150, which is round 13. And I took Chubb because I'm like, okay, I already have 3 running backs. And this can, work for redraft as well. If you already have 2 or 3 running backs you feel amazing about, why not? Why not take a shot on Chubb? Because everyone in round 13 is a lottery ticket anyway. Maybe lottery ticket is more 15 on. But in 13, how much confidence do we really have that these guys can be running back, wide receiver, tight end ones? Not that much. So for someone who's done it always when healthy, why not take a shot? In early summer, he was going in around 9, 10. That's probably too aggressive because he could very well miss half the season and that would hurt. But once we're hitting round 12, 13, 14, if he's going to fall that far and I'm getting him as my 4th running back, just not take a 5th running back at all, rely on those first 3 until he returns, I'm totally fine with that. And honestly, if I took him in round 13 and he never produced as even a low-end running back 1 at any point in the season, I still think it's worth it at the ADP because there's also an outcome where he returns in week 5. He kind of gets going, and by week 10, 11, 12, he's really racking up a lot of touches in the weeks that matter the most, and he's my 4th running back. That's significant value, so I like him. And honestly, I don't see how we're taking Jerome Ford right now. Jerome Ford probably in a day or 2 is going to flip Chubb and now be drafted before him. I don't see that as value unless you're doing RB0. So if you go RB0 and you're saying, I need Ford because I know over the first month or so of the season, he's going to be really good, and that's how I'm building it out, go for it. If you're not building RB0 and you're just drafting a running back there, especially if you're not going to even use him to start the season, you're not going to use him in his most valuable weeks, you're paying a way higher price just because of the unknown with Chubb, I feel like there's only downside there at that point. So I'm out on Jerome Ford. I hit his new ADP. And then Foreman, I don't know, he's a final pick. If you feel like making it, do it. As for the other guys, I wouldn't look too much into those movements. Tank Bigsby is down because people don't really trust him. There hasn't been a lot of hype surrounding him, but he was already just a last round pick, so that one doesn't matter too much. It's really just other sleepers have gained steam, and we haven't heard a ton about him. Ty Chandler is up because there was a beat report saying that he's going to have a role this season, that they are going to mix him in, that Aaron Jones is the one and will have a decent amount of touches on early downs, but the Ty Chandler is going to have a consistent role. I think people heard that and they're like, okay, if he's going to have a role regardless, he's one of the premier handcuffs, right? Like, you know, there's not actually that many handcuffs in the NFL where we know if the starter goes down, we have like a feature back. I think Ty Chandler is one of them, kind of with like Blake Corum, where it's like those two, if the starter goes down, you're going to get really, really good workload from the backups. Those are guys you want. So kind of makes sense. And then Mitchell, pretty similar thing. Beat Reporter said that he's the clear number 2 running back. There's been some speculation that Isaac Urendo, that like super athletic rookie they have, or maybe another running back could kind of push Mitchell as that backup. Doesn't seem to be the case, which kind of makes sense. They've always preferred Elijah Mitchell as that backup. So I think people are more steaming his ADP now. Again, that one is also warranted. At wide receiver, 3 biggest risers are Demario Douglas, Rashee Rice, and Rashad Bateman. 3 biggest fallers last week are Zay Jones, DJ Chark, and Quentin Johnson. But to be fair, you don't need to look at those that much. Zay was the biggest faller, and he dropped 2 spots. I mean, 2-spot drop in the final rounds. That's not really much to worry about. I don't think that we're like heavily targeting any of Zay Jones, DJ Chark, or Quentin Johnson. But I think Zay Jones has the most appeal because if he can be out there, like if he can maybe even beat out Michael Wilson, be that 2 on the outside across from Marvin Harrison Jr., or just that they're maybe going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets and he'll be out there a lot. I still think with all the coverage that's going to be, you know, allocated to Marvin Harrison Jr. and allocated to Trey McBride, that he's still a solid pick later on because we do have a history of him commanding targets, whereas we don't for Michael Wilson. But, you know, again, these guys fell like 1.5 or 2 spots. I wouldn't worry much about that. I did mention in a recent newsletter, which is free, by the way. Go to the website, there'll be a pop-up. Sign up for that with your email. I mentioned in one of the recent newsletters that Bateman was a good sleeper. The problem was he was rising really fast in ADP, and they still have Flowers, Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry. Like, those players exist. They're going to get a ton of touches, a ton of targets. Bateman has a ceiling, and it's not an amazing one. And we've had hype from him before, like every year. Basically, he gets hyped, and then he does absolutely nothing. So I said at the time, when he was probably at this point going like 15 picks back from where he was, I was fine with the ADP, but any sort of rise, I was going to be completely out. And I said completely out if he cracks into the top 160. He's officially at like 160, 161 right now. He'll be in the top 160 in a day or two. I have officially basically stopped drafting him. He's to the point where like people are reaching so far for him in drafts right now. I just can't go there with Rashad Bateman. Rashee Rice, he's on the rise just because honestly, I don't know that people thought he would make it to camp. I think people kind of thought that like we'd get the suspension news, that he wouldn't be able to like be in like team activities, that we just wouldn't hear from him, and we would know that he's suspended for like half a season. We don't know at this point. Apparently he's doing really well in camp. So you've got that news combined with people being like, well, what if it's only 6 games? What if it's only 4 games? Then he'd be going too late. So I think we've probably saw him bottom out at ADP until we know. If we get an 8-game suspension from Rashee Rice, his ADP will fall around or so. If it's 6 games, it probably stays where it is. If it's 4 games, it's going to go way, way, way up. But especially 8 games, that means with the bye, you won't have him for what? 9 of the first 13 regular season weeks in fantasy. That's going to hurt, obviously, right? Or I guess it would be either 14 regular season weeks, whatever it is. You wouldn't have him for 9, I believe, of 14 regular season weeks. That's tough, right? So he'd probably drop a little bit. But yeah, he's looking great in camp. So when he's back out there, he's probably going to have a role. I just have no idea when we're actually going to find out. I think it's kind of random when suspension will drop. Then Douglas, I think he's rising, honestly, because people forgot about him. And maybe I've been too high on, Polk, Baker, these 2 rookies. I don't think I'm too high on Polk. I think Polk's talented. But I think Baker was probably getting a little bit too much hype from people. Douglas is probably the better pick between those 2. He's a great player. He just doesn't have that like draft pedigree. But yeah, I mean, he's a good player. I think people forgot about him, and people are starting to realize now that he's like doing well in camp, like, oh yeah, he was great last season. He was like all they could do in the passing game. He's probably going to be great again this season. And as a quarterback upgrade, he's probably going too late in drafts. At tight end, only risers, Pat Freiermuth. Only fallers are TJ Hawkinson and Jonnu Smith. Arthur Smith said he wants to use Pat like Pitts. I honestly don't know if that is a compliment or a death sentence. Like, I truly do not know. I'm not super high on the Pittsburgh passing offense. And like, I think Pickens projects really well. So he could hit. And he's probably someone you want more on Underdog because he's got that weekly ceiling. I still think they got to bring someone in. They do not have a wide receiver 2 right now. I think they're going to bring someone else in. That's going to hurt everyone. But overall, it's not an offense I really want to invest in other than the running backs, because they're going to run the ball a lot. And both these two are very fair prices on them for Najee and Warren. But Pat, I can't get behind it. So hopefully he keeps rising and we get other players cheaper. Then Hawkinson, he's falling, same reason to Chubb. We just don't know timeline yet. People are getting scared. Jonnu to me is interesting. I like him a lot as a sleeper. No real news supporting the drop. If anything, like reading between the lines, almost positive news from the coaching staff there, kind of saying like, saying what we've been saying for a while, and that it's like, just because they haven't utilized a tight end doesn't mean they won't, right? Like, just because they didn't have a tight end they wanted to scheme specific touches to doesn't mean that it's just going to be the same old, same old. I think that's kind of how they said. It's like, oh, the same thing's going to happen, right? No. Like, now they have Jonnu Smith. Now they have a yak monster. Now they have someone who they can scheme screen passes to and passes working across the field. They didn't have that before. There was someone who's highly athletic, basically. So I don't know. I think he's going to have a strong role. Hopefully he keeps falling. We can just rack up a ton of shares of him. Then finally, at quarterback, no risers, but a decent amount of fallers. Basically, the entire quarterback, like 12 through 20 range, fell by like 3 or 4 picks each. I think that's all strategy based. I don't think everyone's just completely off of all of these quarterbacks. I've noticed it as well, like doing drafts. A lot of times that round like 10, 11, 12, 13 range, you've got quarterbacks falling like literally 20 or 30 spots back from their ADP. So I think this trend will continue. I don't know how far these quarterbacks will fall. But yeah, I think it's really just people not wanting to take quarterback there, kind of really wanting to buy into some of these players getting hype before there's a drop off in like running back, wide receiver, and tight end talent. And then it's like, okay, now there's a drop off. Now we go back to quarterback. So I think it's all strategy based. I think really the point here is, there's truly no need to reach for a quarterback unless you want to do so on the elite ones. Like if you have a take, you're like, I think Anthony Richardson is a quarterback 1, scores 28 points per game. All right, if you want to reach on him a little bit, go for it. If you think Lamar has one of his MVP seasons, okay, you want to reach on that a few spots, go for it. Especially once you exit the first like 8 or 9 quarterbacks and you get into this general range, like round like 9 through 12, 13, please do not reach for any of those quarterbacks. They do have a much lower chance of being league winners and a much greater chance of seeing their ADP really drop. So you want to chance it. You want to say, okay, I like this guy. He's at ADP, but maybe I can get him in the next round. Maybe I can get him in the round after that. If not, well, what about Justin Herbert? What about Jared Goff? What about Kirk Cousins? Like, there's so many of those quarterbacks. One of them's going to fall by like a round or 2 in every draft. Take that one, right? So that's kind of how I'd be approaching quarterback this season. The drop in ADP is probably warranted. Hopefully it keeps happening. We can get some really good values there. So if you want to see ADP movement in real time for free, you can see that on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. While you're there, you can check out my ESPN and sleeper draft strategy studies I did over the off season. I collected results from over 2 million redraft leagues to find the best strategies. That is something that no other site has ever done. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. If you watched this far, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and thanks for watching.